At 28 years old, I am still haunted by the scars of a childhood marred by favoritism and betrayal. Growing up as a twin should have meant sharing equal love and opportunities with my brother, but instead, it became the foundation for a lifetime of emotional wounds. From the moment we were born, our parents made it clear who they believed was destined for greatness, him, their golden child, while I was cast aside like an unwanted shadow. The disparity in how we were treated wasn't subtle. It was glaring, suffocating, and unrelenting. My earliest memories are filled with moments where I stood on the sidelines, watching him bask in the spotlight that should have belonged to both of us. One memory burns brighter than the rest: a birthday party, so extravagant that it felt more like a royal gala than a celebration for a child. While my brother laughed with his friends inside our home, surrounded by balloons, gifts, and laughter, I was banished to the cold reality outside the window pane. I remember pressing my face against the glass, fogging it with my breath, feeling invisible yet painfully aware of my exclusion. That year, I didn't even get a proper cake, just a small, store-bought pastry left on the kitchen counter without a single candle or word of acknowledgement from my parents. It wasn't just about the lack of material things. It was the message behind it. You don't matter. But perhaps the cruelest blow came when I dared to step out of my assigned role as the forgotten twin. One afternoon, desperate to belong, I tried joining a game my brother and his friends were playing in the living room. They barely noticed me at first, but when they did, the atmosphere shifted instantly. My brother shot me a look of disdain before turning to our parents, who swooped in like vultures ready to pick apart their prey. "What makes you think you deserve to play with them?" My mother spat, her voice sharp enough to cut through steel. "You're nothing compared to your brother. You'll never be good enough." Those words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. Humiliated, I fled to my room, clutching my chest as if trying to hold together the pieces of my shattered self-worth. This pattern of neglect and cruelty wasn't an isolated incident. It was woven into the fabric of my daily life. Every attempt I made to prove myself was met with ridicule or indifference. If I excelled at something, it was dismissed as insignificant. If I faltered, it was magnified into proof of my inadequacy. And yet, despite the relentless weight of their disapproval, I clung to fragments of hope, believing that one day I might earn their love or at least their respect. But as time went on, those hopes dimmed, replaced by anger, sadness, and ultimately resilience. This is where my story begins, not with acceptance, but with defiance. The disparity in how my twin brother and I were treated was not just a matter of subtle neglect. It was an unrelenting chasm that widened with every passing year. While he basked in the spotlight, celebrated for his academic achievements, and showered with privileges, I was left to navigate the shadows of their indifference. One of the most glaring examples of this favoritism occurred during our birthdays. My brother's parties were extravagant affairs, complete with themed decorations, professional catering, and enough entertainment to rival a Hollywood production. Friends from school would fill our home, laughing and playing while my parents beamed with pride at the center of it all. Meanwhile, my own birthday celebrations, if they could even be called that, were reduced to a quiet acknowledgement, if any at all. The year I turned 12, I received nothing more than a small store-bought cake placed on the kitchen counter without so much as a candle or a happy birthday. It wasn't just about the lack of material things. It was the message behind it. You are invisible. But the injustice didn't stop there. While my brother hosted sleepovers where his friends stayed up late watching movies and giggling into the night, I was forbidden from inviting anyone over, not even for a casual playdate. Desperate to belong, I once defied their rules by secretly inviting a group of classmates to come over after school. For a brief moment, I felt like a normal kid, laughing alongside my friends in the living room. But that fleeting sense of joy was shattered when my parents walked in unexpectedly. Their faces twisted with fury, they launched into a tirade right in front of my friends. "How dare you bring these people into our house without permission?" My father bellowed, his voice echoing through the walls. My mother chimed in, accusing me of being selfish and disrespectful. I stood frozen, tears streaming down my face as my friends exchanged awkward glances before hurrying out the door. The humiliation burned deep within me, leaving scars that lingered long after the incident. For an entire week, I refused to go to school, too ashamed to face my peers who had witnessed my public shaming. Despite excelling in athletics, a rare talent that should have earned me recognition, I was denied opportunities to participate in extracurricular activities. My parents insisted that sports were frivolous distractions from academics, forcing me to focus solely on subjects that mirrored my brother's strengths. Yet no matter how hard I tried to conform to their expectations, I was met with scorn rather than praise. The ultimate betrayal came when I won first place in a school-wide track meet, crossing the finish line faster than anyone else in my age group. As I stood on the podium clutching my trophy, I scanned the crowd for familiar faces, but my parents were conspicuously absent. When I returned home, flushed with pride and eager to share my victory, they barely glanced at my award. Instead, they scolded me for prioritizing frivolous games over my studies. Do you think running around is going to get you anywhere in life? My mother snapped, her words cutting deeper than any blade. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the trophy that now felt hollow, wondering what I had done to deserve such disdain. These injustices were not isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern that reinforced my role as the unwanted child. Every attempt to prove myself was met with ridicule or dismissal, while my brother's mediocrity was celebrated as brilliance. This relentless bias fueled a growing resentment within me, though I dared not express it openly. Little did I know the worst was yet to come. The seeds of favoritism planted in those early years would soon blossom into something far darker, a web of lies and manipulation orchestrated by my brother, who saw my existence as a threat to his pedestal. But even then, I couldn't have imagined how deeply those roots of betrayal would entangle my life. The favoritism my parents showed toward my twin brother wasn't just a source of emotional pain. It became the breeding ground for something far more sinister: lies, manipulation, and betrayal. My brother, emboldened by their blind devotion, began weaving a web of deceit that would unravel my life piece by piece. At first, it started with small accusations, things like claiming I had stolen his snacks or ruined his homework, but soon, his fabrications grew darker and more calculated. He saw me as a threat to his pedestal, a rival who needed to be eliminated, even though I never once sought to compete with him. His jealousy reached its peak during our 14th birthday party when none of his friends showed up, while mine treated me to ice cream and made me feel loved. That day marked the beginning of his vendetta against me. One evening, the tension in our household erupted into chaos. I was sitting quietly in my room, minding my own business, when I heard a loud thud followed by hysterical sobbing. Before I could process what was happening, my brother stormed into the living room, clutching his forehead, blood trickling down his face. My parents rushed to his side, panic etched across their expressions. "She's crazy," he screamed, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "She hit me. She's always doing this." The accusation hung heavy in the air, suffocating me. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend how he could twist reality so cruelly. Later, I discovered the truth. He had slammed his head against the wall himself, all to frame me. But no one cared about the truth. My mother clutched him protectively, tears streaming down her cheeks, while my father glared at me as if I were a monster. They didn't even give me a chance to defend myself before sentencing me to another round of verbal abuse. But the lies didn't stop within the confines of our home. My brother took his campaign of hatred to school, spreading vicious rumors about me. He told anyone who would listen that I was violent, unstable, and dangerous. At first, I dismissed it as typical sibling rivalry, but the whispers grew louder, more insidious. Friends who used to laugh with me in the hallways now avoided eye contact. Invitations to group hangouts disappeared entirely. It felt like an invisible wall had been erected between me and the world, isolating me from everything I held dear. Then came the day that shattered whatever remained of my dignity. A group of classmates cornered me in the bathroom, their faces twisted with mockery. "So you're the psycho everyone's talking about?" One of them sneered. Another chimed in, "No wonder your brother hates you." Their laughter echoed off the tiled walls as they hurled insults at me, calling me names like crazy and worthless. I wanted to scream, to fight back. Fear paralyzed me. All I could do was stand there, humiliated and broken, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. The isolation that followed was unbearable. Every interaction became tainted by suspicion and judgment. Teachers looked at me differently, as if expecting me to lash out at any moment. Even strangers seemed to sense the toxicity surrounding me, avoiding me like I carried a disease. Yet through it all, my brother continued to play the victim, basking in the sympathy of those who believed his twisted narrative. Each lie he told chipped away at my identity, leaving me questioning whether I truly was the person they claimed I was. The worst part? My parents never questioned him. Not once. To them, he was infallible, a perfect son, and capable of wrongdoing. Meanwhile, I was cast aside, branded as the villain in my own story. This relentless assault on my character wasn't just damaging, it was soul-crushing. It planted seeds of self-doubt that took years to uproot. But little did I know these events were merely precursors to the ultimate betrayal yet to come. The lies my brother spun weren't just meant to hurt me. They were designed to destroy me completely. And as the days turned into weeks, I realized that escaping his shadow would require more than resilience. It would demand courage I didn't know I possessed. The repercussions of my brother's lies were not just confined to whispers in school hallways or cold stares from classmates. They escalated into something far more devastating, shattering the fragile remnants of my childhood. It all came to a head during that fateful meeting with the principal, where I hoped for justice, but instead found myself drowning in a sea of accusations. As we sat in the cramped office, my heart pounding like a drum, I pleaded with the principal to listen to my side of the story. But before I could even finish explaining, my parents turned their backs on me completely. They didn't ask questions. They didn't hesitate. Instead, they rushed to embrace my brother as if he were some wounded hero returning from battle. My mother clutched him tightly, tears streaming down her face, while my father patted his shoulder and assured him everything would be okay. And then came the words that cut deeper than any blade. "You're nothing but a disgrace." My father spat at me, his voice dripping with disdain. "A spoiled, violent child who doesn't deserve our love." That day marked the beginning of my descent into an abyss of abandonment. The suspension was bad enough 10 long days away from school, branded as a bully, but it was only the precursor to what awaited me at home. When we returned, the atmosphere was suffocating. My father stormed into the living room, his face red with anger, and began packing my belongings without so much as a word of explanation. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, watching as he threw my clothes, books, and personal items into a tattered suitcase. "What are you doing?" I cried, my voice trembling. He ignored me, slamming drawers shut and muttering under his breath about how someone like me didn't belong in his house. My mother tried to intervene weakly, asking him to calm down, but she quickly retreated when he snapped at her. My brother watched silently from the corner, a smug smirk playing on his lips, reveling in the chaos he had orchestrated. When the final bag was packed, my father dragged it to the foyer and dumped it by the door. I fell to my knees, begging them to reconsider, tears streaming down my face. "Please, Dad, I didn't do anything wrong." I sobbed, clinging to his legs. But he shoved me away, his expression hardening. "A monster like you doesn't deserve to live here," he growled. "I'll call your grandmother to come get you, if she wants you." Those words hit me like a freight train, leaving me gasping for air. I stood there in shock as they ushered me out the door. The same door I had walked through countless times as a child, now slamming shut behind me. I was left standing on the cold pavement in nothing but a thin sweater and jeans, the biting wind cutting through me like knives. My hands trembled as I clutched the straps of my bag, feeling utterly alone in the world. For what felt like hours, I sat there on the curb, hugging my knees to my chest, crying until my throat was raw. Each car that passed seemed to blur into the background, their headlights casting fleeting shadows on the ground. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, heavier than the bags beside me. How could they do this? How could they cast me out like garbage after years of raising me, or at least pretending to? Just as despair threatened to consume me entirely, headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as they approached. It was my grandmother, her familiar figure stepping out of the car with a look of fury mixed with concern. She wrapped me in her arms, shielding me from the cold, and promised me that everything would be all right. But as we drove away from the only home I had ever known, I couldn't help but feel like I was leaving behind pieces of myself, pieces I wasn't sure I'd ever recover. The scars of my past were etched deeply into my soul, but they also became the fuel that drove me to rebuild my life from the ashes. After being cast out by my parents and left to fend for myself at such a young age, I vowed never to let anyone control my destiny again. Determined to rise above the pain, I poured every ounce of energy into pursuing an education, a dream I clung to despite the odds stacked against me. College wasn't just a goal. It was my lifeline, a chance to escape the toxic environment I had endured for so long. But the road to success was anything but smooth. To afford tuition, I worked 2 part-time jobs while juggling coursework, often sacrificing sleep, meals, and even basic comforts. There were nights when I sat in my tiny rented room, stomach growling, forcing myself to focus on textbooks instead of the gnawing hunger. I learned to stretch a single meal over days, rationing food like someone stranded in the wilderness. Yet through it all, I refused to give up. Each late-night study session and each exhausting shift at work felt like a small act of defiance against the people who had underestimated me. As time went on, I discovered something unexpected. Writing gave me a voice. It allowed me to channel the emotions I had suppressed for years: anger, betrayal, resilience into words that resonated with others. What started as a hobby soon blossomed into a passion and eventually a career. I began freelancing during college, taking on projects that pay pennies per word just to make ends meet. Slowly but surely, those pennies turned into dollars, and those dollars became a steady income. By the time I graduated, I had built a portfolio impressive enough to attract clients from well-known companies. My reputation grew, and so did my confidence. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free from the shadow of my twin brother, free from the suffocating expectations of my parents, and free to explore the world on my own terms. Traveling became both my refuge and my inspiration. As a digital nomad, I roamed across continents, immersing myself in new cultures and experiences that enriched not only my writing, but also my spirit. But this newfound freedom came with its own challenges. One unforgettable incident occurred during a critical assignment for a high-profile client. I was traveling to interview a subject for an article that could either make or break my budding career. The journey itself was grueling: a 12-hour bus ride, followed by a treacherous drive along winding mountain roads. Exhausted but determined, I pushed forward, telling myself that nothing would stand in the way of my dreams. And then disaster struck. A reckless driver slammed into my car, leaving me shaken and bruised. My head throbbed, my arm ached, and shards of glass littered the seat around me. Panic threatened to consume me as I realized the deadline for the article loomed closer than ever. But I couldn't afford to falter, not now, not when I had fought so hard to get here. With trembling hands, I pulled out my laptop in the hospital waiting room, ignoring the pain radiating through my body. Every keystroke sent waves of discomfort coursing through me, yet I pressed on, fueled by sheer willpower. When I finally submitted the article mere minutes before the deadline, I collapsed onto the chair, tears streaming down my face, not from the physical pain, but from the overwhelming sense of triumph. Against all odds, I had done it. Looking back, those struggles shaped me into the person I am today, resilient, resourceful, and unyielding. They taught me that no matter how many times life knocks you down, you can always find a way to rise again if you're willing to fight for it. And fight I did. From the girl who once sat crying on the curb outside her childhood home to the woman who now travels the world crafting stories that inspire others, I proved to myself that my past does not define me, it empowers me. Years had passed since I last heard from my parents, years filled with silence. So profound it felt like they had erased me from their lives entirely. In that time, I'd built a new existence for myself, a thriving career as a freelance writer, a life of independence, and a deep bond with my grandmother, the only person who truly understood and supported me. I had come to terms with the fact that my parents' love was conditional, reserved solely for my twin brother, their golden child. So when my phone buzzed one afternoon with 6 missed calls from my mother, I stared at the screen in disbelief. It wasn't just the sight of her name that shocked me. It was the sudden intrusion of a past I had worked so hard to leave behind. Hesitantly, I called her back, bracing myself for whatever awaited on the other end. Her voice came through immediately, cheerful yet oddly rehearsed. "We saw your TV interview," she began, her tone dripping with pride that felt more performative than genuine. My father chimed in moments later, his gruff voice joining hers as they launched into an elaborate story about how proud they were of my accomplishments. At first, I listened skeptically, unsure why this unexpected call had even happened. But then, the true purpose of their outreach revealed itself. They began describing the dire state of their home, sending me photos of peeling paint, cracked walls, and leaky ceilings. "It's falling apart," my mother lamented, her voice heavy with desperation. "We're retired now and we don't have the means to fix it. You've done so well for yourself, you could help us out, couldn't you?" The request hit me like a punch to the gut. Help them? After all they had done or rather hadn't done for me. The audacity of their plea left me reeling. Suspicious, I decided to dig deeper. Under the guise of wanting to understand the scope of repairs, I casually asked if they considered selling any assets to cover the cost. That's when I stumbled upon the truth, a gleaming luxury car parked proudly in their driveway, its polished surface mocking me in every photo they hadn't intended for me to see. A quick online search confirmed what I already suspected. They had recently purchased the vehicle, a lavish gift from my brother, no doubt, as a reward for his hard work. The hypocrisy burned like acid in my veins. Here they were, begging me for money while lavishing him with expensive presents, proving once again where their priorities lay. Furious but determined not to let emotions cloud my judgment, I calmly told them I wouldn't provide financial assistance without certain conditions. Their voices sharpened instantly, demanding to know what I meant. Without hesitation, I laid out my ultimatum. If they wanted my help, they would have to publicly admit the truth about my brother's lies, the same lies that had destroyed my reputation, isolated me socially, and led to my eventual expulsion from their home. I wanted them to confront the damage they had enabled, to humiliate him in front of the very people who had witnessed their favoritism over the years. My father erupted in anger, shouting that I was being disrespectful and ungrateful. "You owe us," he bellowed, his voice trembling with rage. My mother pleaded, guilt-tripping me by reminding me of the years they had raised me, as if those years somehow justified their cruelty. But I stood firm, refusing to back down. What followed was a relentless barrage of phone calls and texts, each message more desperate and eventually more threatening than the last. They called dozens of times a day, their voices oscillating between pleading and accusatory. When that failed, they resorted to intimidation, warning me that they would sever ties completely if I didn't comply. "Do you really want to be the reason our family falls apart?" My mother sobbed during one particularly heated exchange. Yet, beneath their manipulative words, I sensed something else: fear. Fear that I might expose the ugly truth they had spent years trying to bury. Their desperation only fueled my resolve. For too long, I had carried the weight of their betrayal in silence. Now I was finally in a position to demand accountability, not just for myself, but for the young girl who had been crushed under the weight of their neglect. This was no longer just about money. It was about justice. Inasmuch as they tried to twist the narrative, I knew the truth would always stand stronger than their lies. The aftermath of sending that email was like a storm breaking after years of suffocating silence. Within hours, my inbox flooded with responses, some supportive, others accusatory, but the most unexpected reactions came from within my own family. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, expressing shock and outrage over the truth I had laid bare. Many admitted they had no idea how deeply entrenched the favoritism and emotional abuse were in our household. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had once dismissed me as the difficult one now apologized for their ignorance and promised to stand by me. Some even took it a step further, publicly siding with me on social media. They shared screenshots of my brother's damning confession, calling him out for his lies and condemning my parents' blatant neglect. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. But while the support buoyed me, it also unleashed a torrent of backlash against my family. My parents and brother became pariahs among relatives, their actions dissected and criticized in ways they could never have anticipated. But the relief I felt was short-lived. My brother, unable to face the consequences of his deceit, retaliated with venomous fury. Late one night, as I sat scrolling through messages from well-meaning relatives, a notification popped up, a text from him. His words seared into my screen. Asterisk. You'll regret this for the rest of your life. How dare you turn everyone against us? You're dead to me. The threat hung heavy in the air, its malice palpable even through the cold glow of my phone. It wasn't just anger, it was desperation, a final attempt to regain control. When threats failed to cow me, he escalated, bombarding me with increasingly hostile messages, each one more unhinged than the last. Fear crept back into my chest, a familiar shadow I thought I'd left behind. But this time I refused to let it consume me. With trembling hands, I forwarded the messages to my lawyer, who wasted no time issuing a cease and desist order. The document was clear. Any further contact would result in legal action. To my surprise, the threat worked. They backed off, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Though unsettling, it was a silence I welcomed. Amidst the chaos, there was one constant source of solace: my grandmother. She remained my anchor, unwavering in her love and support. Together, we began building something beautiful, a small garden tucked away in the corner of her backyard. Each day, we planted seeds, nurtured saplings, and watched life bloom amidst the soil. There was something profoundly healing about digging my hands into the earth, feeling the cool dirt slip between my fingers as if washing away the grime of my past. We grew roses, lavender, and sunflowers, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the gray memories that had haunted me for so long. In that little patch of greenery, I found peace, a sanctuary where the weight of betrayal and pain seemed lighter, almost bearable. My grandmother often joked that the garden was our masterpiece, but to me it was more than that. It symbolized resilience, growth, and the possibility of new beginnings. Yet, healing wasn't linear. During one particularly raw therapy session, I found myself unraveling. As my therapist gently probed the depths of my childhood trauma, I recounted the moment I was cast out of my home, the humiliation, the biting cold, the crushing loneliness. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably, blurring my vision as sobs racked my body. For a moment, it felt like I was reliving it all over again. But then, through the haze of emotion, my therapist said something that struck a chord. Look at how far you've come. The fact that you're here facing this pain head-on shows just how strong you are. Her words hit me like revelation. Yes, the scars still lingered, but I was no longer the frightened teenager who had been abandoned on the curb. I was a survivor, a woman who had clawed her way out of darkness and built a life filled with purpose and joy. Today, my world looks nothing like the one I grew up in. Professionally, I've carved out a niche as a respected freelance writer, traveling the globe and inspiring others with my journey. Personally, I've cultivated a life rich with meaning, anchored by the bond I share with my grandmother. Our days are filled with laughter, gardening, and heartfelt conversations that mend the fractures of the past. And though I know the road to healing is ongoing, I feel stronger with each passing day. In the end, justice isn't always about retribution. It's about reclaiming your voice, your dignity, and your sense of self-worth. By exposing the truth, I didn't just hold my family accountable. I freed myself from the chains of their lies. My parents and brother may never acknowledge their wrongs, but that no longer matters. What matters is that I forged a future untethered from their toxicity, a future rooted in love, authenticity, and hope.